Welcome to the Orykl Podcast, where we ask the big question: Hey universe, what's going on? I'm your host, Huenu Solsona, and today we are exploring another fascinating spiritual journey. Let's get started. It's Huenu Solsona here with Orykl's podcast, Hey Universe, What's Going On? And today we have Jacob Cooper with us, who's going to tell us his amazing story of his near-death experience. So, Jacob, welcome.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to share my near-death experience, and certainly I hope that it brings up some familiarity and memories to some, viewers, as we all are eternal spiritual beings having these temporary human experiences. September of 1993, that was just the age of 3 years old, where I had my near-death experience. Location of my NDE was, of all places, a playground. I, at the time, did not know this, but I had a condition called whooping cough, otherwise known as pertussis. I climbed up onto a ladder, going onto a slide. At the end of the climb onto the ladder, I just began to suffocate due to whooping cough. It's a very scary moment. There was nothing to grasp or to hold on to, and that's when everything just was out of my control, out of my grasp. It was a very traumatizing moment, very scary moment. But I felt myself leaving my body as, my body wasn't able to work, as much like the analogy that I have. If you're in a car and it's not working, you're not going to probably hang in the car. You're going to pop the engine and see what's going on. And so that's what I was able to do. And I was able to see my body. It just was deprived of oxygen, was really, not able to function. And I was able to see and feel my brain. Moments later, I just felt my brain literally snap in half, as if, your whole life you're being plugged into a wall and you yank that plug out of the wall. And then I ascended, towards a lot of classical near-death experience references where I experienced a tunnel. I experienced myself elevating. I felt vibrational frequencies, and it was a place where I just felt there was no limitation to how good I felt or how high I went. In the physical body, we're used to being limited beings in many ways. And on the other side, there was no limit to how good I felt. There was no time. It was just pure bliss, pure ascension with no possible limitation. In this experience, I was able to become aware of the creative force of all of life, where all of life stems from, and that became very apparent to me. Um, and for me, I just knew what it was. In our language, we refer to that as God or the divine, which has a lot of religious connotations to it. But to me, it went beyond any type of verbiage that we have to describe it. But I just knew that's who I am, where I come from, where we all are connected to. Um, and so I experienced that. I experienced a lot of stuff, such as awareness of my spirit guides. I was aware of angels that were around me. I looked up and I saw a countless array of angels that were floating in front of me. I saw, spirit family, my soul family that was with me. I had recollection of what's something called a life review, which is, um, you think of a movie, you think of different scenes in a movie, but just imagine that movie is the highlights of your life, or sometimes the lowlights too, and you just kind of are able to kind of encapsulate your life. But this life review went beyond this lifetime. It was a life review that transcended what people can understand as past lives, and I had awareness of past lives that I've lived.
Mm.
And I was just aware of a decision to make. Most near-death experiences are told, hey, it's not your time. You have, more work to do. But for me, it was given autonomy, and I just was very uncertain as to what to do. I was just given premonitions of the work that I would be doing, the people that I would be helping, and I said, "Wow, this is the to me, service is about the God realization, the God embodiment." And I just thought the other side is always there, but to bring the other side to this side, certainly a window that I couldn't close. And with that agreement, everything started to dissipate, and I just had a lot of doubts. I was just like, man, what did I just do? I turned down the other side and stuff like that. But it all just kind of came back to me where it's just, no, this is the path to go, to trust it. And we all have a path before we come here in many
And tell
ways.
me, when you were given that choice, were you thinking with your 3-year-old mind, or did you have kind of a broader awareness, like now, or even broader than now?
Well, I mean, I would say truthfully, um, no 3-year-old or no any-year-old thinks with their own mind. You know, when you think about it, we all have a saying, we're an infinite spiritual being in a finite physical body. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that the body produces who we are? Does that mean that this life produces who we are? Is this our only story? Is this who we really are? And the answer is no. We are all, at the end of the day, eternal souls, just temporarily experiencing ourselves in the body throughout different genders, cultures, ages. But all those are just experiences. They're not the full totality of who anyone is. And so it's kind of weird because we look at a physical body and we think that that's all that is there on the surface. But beyond any age is an infinite soul, that we don't always see with the physical eye. And just because there's an incongruency with the soul and the body, and how the kids are able to speak and process things externally, it doesn't mean that there's a whole other, internal dialogue happening that isn't always being shown. And so two things could be true at the same time. While yes, technically I was a 3-year-old kid, or any kid, I can't deny that too. Ultimately I really was not that kid. I just was experiencing that as a kid. And so I hope that makes sense for a lot of people. It's very thought provocative, but hey, that's how we really expand the bounds of our awareness and sometimes get out of our own BS, which think really stands for belief systems, because we
Okay.
really have a lot of hard belief systems that maybe get in the way of our true, unlimited, eternal nature. So
Yeah.
this was certainly processed through my soul, while at the same time I still had a connection to my 3-year-old self. Like I had questions like, what would I look like, if I cross over? Would this story be like? What would my parents experience? So there were still some types of connections to it, but I just remembered I am not that.
Mm.
That is not who I am. I'm experiencing that, but I am an old eternal soul. And I walked around kind of thinking I was that way. It's kind of like there's like this meme of this cat that thinks it's a cat, but it's really a lion at the end of the day. And it's walk around thinking it's a cat, but yet at the end of the day, I guess you could say a small kitty cat, right? So a small kitten, whatever. So I think my story is not anything all that different from most of us, where we have this box of identity of who we are, which has incongruency with who we really are. And
Yeah.
by remembering that belief has a pivotal role in our behaviors. As we know, there's a tremendous associative component to beliefs and behaviors.
Mm. Mm. Love it. Okay, wonderful. And then what happened?
Well, obviously, I didn't stay there. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here in front of you. I
Yeah.
would have a death experience, but
Sure.
it's funny. My friend Raymond Moody coined the term near-death experience, and even he will say it
Mm.
has nothing to do with death, as when you have near-death experiences, you look at death right in the face and recognize that it's a fiction. It's not,
Yeah.
on a soul level. Sure, on a physical basis, and certainly to grieving loved ones, it certainly can feel like that. But
Yeah.
for anyone who crosses over, there is no death, it is a rebirth.
Mm.
I woke up in a hospital bed and I saw that my mother was quite in emotional distress. And for me, it was very certainly frustrating as I didn't have the exact language or verbiage to describe it, to articulate what happened. And so I had to really keep all this stuff to myself for quite a long time.
Right.
But I was certainly changed. I think people who study this stuff will tell you that near-death experiences and a lot of these transformative experiences really prove the hard notion that there's a dichotomy between the brain and mind. They'll tell you that near-death experiences, like myself, we have little to no brainwave, you know, faculties operating. And
Mm.
yet there's this whole other mind that's going on. And so how do you explain that if the brain just produces all of our thoughts, all of our awareness? Where is this coming from? And so for myself, I really understood, quite early on that the brain was just the filter of life. And I felt a shift in my brain where literally within my brain, which I now know is really a part called the pineal gland, it was open to connecting to the other side. I felt a sliver of life going through light, going through my brain that I could ascend to and connect to at any point in time. And so for me, I just craved getting quiet. I would purposely try to go to the bathroom just so I could connect and go,
Mhm.
to the heavenly realm and higher awareness. And I had conversations, with God and higher awareness still. I was aware of beings that were still around me after my NDE, and I just had the uncomfortable feeling and understanding that others around me just didn't see what I saw. And I had some encounters with this, and I just kind of checked if others saw that. So it was the suffocating feeling that I had in my NDE didn't leave, once I was recovered. It stayed with me for a couple decades until I was able to really own this experience and not see it as a burden like it really felt for much of my childhood. As most kids, what are you prescribed is you just want to fit in, you just want to be normal. And you have this experience which says, you can't be a conveyor on the wheel, so to speak, on the belt. You're just like, wow, this is a
Mhm.
big myth. This is not true. We're kind of like Plato's allegory of the caves. We're just prisoners
Yeah.
of the images behind us, and this isn't reality at the end of the day.
And yeah, and tell me, I hear this so often that as kids, or young adults, you have this experience, and it's just so different to this physical reality. People don't really understand it and maybe judge it, or you want to fit in, like you say. What would you suggest that a parent does if a child is telling them that they're seeing things or they're experiencing things that
Mhm.
they don't understand? What's the best way, in your opinion, for a parent to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a great, valid question, and I have a unique vantage point where I'm not just any other near-death experiencer. Of course, I happen to be a two-time author, published author, and I do a lot of work, but I work on both sides, and I work in the mental health field as a licensed mental health therapist. And so I've run groups and I train actually other therapists for this type of conundrum at hand.
Right.
You think of it as just any other creative force, that kids are tapping into. So do you repress that creative force? Do you put down that creative force? Do you try to put your own regurgitated image of yourself on that child, or do you allow your kids to bloom and to unfold as they should and to try to harness and really expand that gift? I mean, I don't look at it as anything differently than the great LeBron James or Stephen Curry having, or Lionel Messi having great gifts as a soccer player. You don't say, oh, you know what, you shouldn't play that. That's not going to help you in life. That's not good. No, parents, they see a gift in their kid, they'll work on it. And so I think if there's more education that this is not a blessing, this is a gift, but it's a power, and with great power comes a great responsibility, sure. I think, more kids will start to bloom, and the world will be a more beautiful place when kids start to really tap into who they are versus who their parents, most parents just want a self-replicate of themselves and their cultures, and there's not a lot of room for innovation and creativity. You just wonder why after 20, thousands of years, we're still regurgitating a lot of the same patterns. It's because, people don't want to pivot, and don't want to accept something that might be different than their procreation. And
Yeah.
so, you can't expect change if you just want just the same you and that same generational pattern. So,
Yeah.
I think people have to be open for different and to honor what difference can do, because you can't change anything by doing the same thing over and over again,
Yeah.
you
No,
know.
100%. Absolutely. And I just had a question about your life review as well. When you were going through this life review, you mentioned you were reviewing other lifetimes as well. But when you were reviewing your life as a 3-year-old, do you recall the purpose of this review and how you felt about it? Because at 3 years old, you're very young still. I imagine if you're an adult, you could look back and say, oh, wow, I wish I had done that differently. But what was that experience like for you?
Well, there's a saying, it's not a matter of the years of your life, but rather the life within your years.
Mm.
And so there are people who could live the world, 100 years, but it could feel like a second if they didn't have much love and much, just much joy and much connections. And so time is a very funny thing. It's really not how we see it. And the other side, there is no time. It's kind of like, for us, we're like chopping up air and thinking that we're doing something, but or taking like buckets out of the water and thinking we're doing something, but it's still, you can't compartmentalize time. It's eternal. And so you could think you're doing it, but really you're not changing what is. And what is that life is eternal. It's not finite. But at the same time, it's finite in our time here, in our bodies. That's undeniable. No one's lived eternally in their bodies just yet. There's no tuck everlasting body of water that people could tap into. But for me, it was just more of the love that I experienced and the dynamic that I had with my parents, and the understanding that and people around me, but the understanding that no matter what happens, we're going to meet at a certain point. We're going to be okay. Whether I go now or go later, we're eternally connected. Within
Right.
past lives, I was able to see myself really transcending the globe and having a lot of different lifetimes, just spanning the globe, culture to culture, civilization to civilization. And on the other side, there's kind of like a parallel universe where we have this globe and there's like this overlaying level of it to a degree. And as you go up and ascend, it's just pure light, which I think I was in my near-death experience. And the more connected to you are to that, that's just a vibrational frequency, you'll be able to ascend to that realm.
Hmm.
But I just had a couple different lifetimes which, really stuck with me, which certainly influenced my career trajectory and getting into past life regression and studying reincarnation and really understanding kids' past lives first and foremost. I've read a couple books about children remembering past lives, which again is just shows you how a child or anyone is so much more than what they think, and they're not this one page in the story that they're reading, their entire encyclopedia. So it's fascinating. And
Yeah.
obviously, if anyone has any questions or concerns, I recommend really checking out the University of Virginia. They have a whole archive of case studies, of different references where there's evidential pieces of information with a lot of the kids. For me, my pieces of evidence came more intuitive. I just went, on about like a couple occasions where I just sat down and people were able to tap into exactly what I saw in my last lifetime and describe it very accurately. And so I was a complete stranger. This was before I ever became public with any work that I did. So for me, that was a validation that this was real. But I know a lot of people who have checked out the town records, remembered their names, their villages, their families. Even there's a situation where someone even reunited with their family members who are still alive from a past life, which is mind-blowing,
Yeah.
and I think just like remembered their names, where they lived, just this stuff is fascinating. And how could kids possibly remember the town they lived in, their names, and they're able to validate and check it up? There's no explanation whatsoever for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I've seen programs like that. It is fascinating, and we all like to
sure.
have that proof, right? It is nice. Human beings love to, to have proof, but I've talked to so many people like yourself. For me, the proof is also in the numbers. So many people have these kinds of experiences, not just near death, but otherworldly, and it's good to talk about it. We often don't because society doesn't really
Mhm.
accept it as okay, or we seem like as a bit weird, but really we all, I believe, in fact, most of us have had some sort of experience. We might have shut it off and try not to remember or excused it as something, other than, but we're all tapped in, right? We are all spiritual beings and we're all connected always. So and tell me how, and so just to finish your story, that you saw your mother and that was
Mhm.
it. You didn't speak about it for a long time. And how did you eventually decide to, or what happened that you eventually decided to start talking about it and eventually work with it?
So it's a great question. My father, who's also a therapist, recently told me that I came up to him, after, a little bit after I had my near-death experience, and I said, when I was rushed by the ambulance to the hospital, something happened on that day, and one day it will make sense to you, but for right now it won't. And I'm using my language that I have now. I'm sure it was phrased differently, but essentially it wasn't the right timing for it. And I think there's a misunderstanding through I guess probably a lot of movies. You watch the movie like Heaven is for Real about the kid or whatever. There's a lot of misunderstandings that when people have near-death experiences, all of a sudden they just shout from the mountaintops to everyone, and that's just how it is. That's a possibility for some, but for a lot of people, and it's very congruent with near-death experience research that particularly for children, it takes around 2 to 3 decades to fully process and to integrate into this reality. And so it doesn't mean that you change the events, but you're able to have a vocabulary for it. You're able to understand it, to process it. And
Right.
I also think the traumatic component of it is something that's overlooked. And so for me, I have a unique perspective of looking at it from a mental health perspective. I mean, these things are incredibly traumatizing too, and they can be from a physical basis. I mean, the suffocating part was the scariest moment of my life. Like, I don't want to sugarcoat that. And so for myself, that there was a gift of trauma where that allowed me to remember it fully. I mean, obviously, there's a dissociative component to trauma, but there's also the ability to clearly recall it, clear as day. And
Mm.
certainly, I mean, I always use this reference, but if you're around during the Pearl Harbor time or 9/11 time, I could ask you like, or recently, I don't know, OJ trial, whatever. Like I could ask you like, where were you during this monumental event? And you could say if where you were, what you were doing, what was going on. But I'd say, all right, so what were you doing a week or two later? You'd be like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And so that, trauma has a very, or any, major life event has a tremendous imprint on memory
Mm.
that we have that we just could like go back to it as if it was yesterday. And
Yeah.
that's the way my near-death experience feels. I just can't believe it was 30 years ago, that I had mine. It
Yeah.
feels like just a second ago. And again,
Yeah.
that's the funny thing about time. But obviously for myself, I kept it always there, it was always there, but I just kind of wanted to fit in. And so just kind of like this beach ball that I kept trying to push down, but the the after effects were very strong in terms of intuition, premonitions, and it was all more of a nuisance than anything cool, to me. But it wasn't until I was gifted a book where I was, started to just get into meditation, yoga, stuff like that. And I was gifted a book, called Embraced by the Light by author named Betty 80, where I just recognized, wow, there's a term for this. Other people have it. And it gave me universality behind it and a cohesion and a permission, to start talking about this stuff. And so that was a great gift that I had where I was able to really identify this as a thing. And it's
Right.
kind of like the work that I do with a client of mine. If they're struggling with something, if they're able to have some type of term for it, it could be helpful, but also there's limitations to it because we're not just that thing. We have a lot of different parts. And that's why I see myself. I'm not just a near-death experiencer. I happen to have one, but I see myself as much more than just that. And my life is just to give back, I guess, what happened to me in those moments where my life was taken and I was given it back. And I try to have others to feel that same type of trajectory, either through my books or workshops or sessions where they feel more connectivity to a life force that
Mm.
is eternal.
Love it. Okay, wonderful. So, how can people get hold of you and what all services do you offer?
Yeah, no, if anyone's interested in touching base with me, they could check out my webpage, jacobLcooper.com. I provide, in-person or remote sessions. I do hypnosis, consciousness consulting for New York State's clients, therapy, a lot of mindfulness stuff. I have a lot of groups, and seminars that I do. I'm also an author, two-time author of Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. You find those both, on Amazon as well. And I'm on social media, Jacob Cooper LCSW on Facebook, Instagram, and I also have my own YouTube channel called The Wisdom Jacob's Ladder where people could check out that as well.
Okay, beautiful. And we'll put all those links below as well. So, it's been wonderful to have you, Jacob. I know we're time pressed, so we'll end it here, but it's been fascinating. Thank you for sharing your story and thank you for being on the Orykl Podcast.
An honor, and it's my hope that this was just a reflection of what we all know deep inside. And I think that's why people are tuning into this as it's very familiar. And people are tuning into these conversations because they remember a part of themselves that is just more than this body. And my hope is we don't have to wait till we go there to get there, that we could have that right here and right now, that degree of a divine mind and a broad sense of reality that is greater each moment as we live.
Yeah, I fully agree. Thank you. It's beautiful.
Thank you.